Good afternoon, my fellow dirty gardeners. I'm Iron, Dirty Dragon. Currently very, very dirty. I've been out in the garden all day. Well, afternoon anyway. Today's video is going to be kind of a fun one, for me anyway, and I will be talking about gardening with containers. There are tons of benefits to gardening with containers and not really a lot of disadvantages. But I'm going to go over some of the general advantages and disadvantages, and then I'm going to go over the different types of containers that I use in my garden and some of the things that I've learned are good, and also some tips and tricks for gardening in containers that might help some people that don't know about these things. Okay, so general benefits for gardening in containers. 1, most of the time you can move them, which is awesome, because then if things are growing larger or conditions are changing or whatever, or you're just not happy with where they are, you can move them. Brilliant, right? 2, you can control the soil that's in them. Remember, like, for example, if you want something that's like more deserty in there, you can put stuff with lots of sand, soil with lots of sand. If you want it for like more boggy, you can add a whole bunch of like really organic matter and clay that holds on to the water better. Yeah, that kind of thing. So you can have little sort of micro beds. That's a good way to put it, actually. Micro beds. They're micro beds. So they're really easy to control that way. 3, they offer seasonal interest all through the year. Especially if they're fancier or different colors. I like blue pots and turquoise pots in particular because for me they're the ones that are the most sort of pretty without looking like woo, you know, right in your face. But I mean, like any colors are awesome in the garden, and you can do whatever you want with it, but it'll always be there in the winter time, even when your plants are dormant. So no matter what, you've always got some kind of interest going on. Okay, another advantage is that you can put pots where things will not grow in the ground, such as over top of tree roots, on gravel, on decks, places where the soil is just really, really crappy and you can't amend it for whatever reason. There's just like all kinds of stuff that isn't conducive to growing. You can put a pot there and you can have yourself a little mini garden. You can add a whole bunch of pots. You can have just one pot. Yeah, and so they're really, really good for that because you can tuck them in places that are trouble spots. I've got a couple here where there's a lot of tree roots and stuff like that, or just shitty soil, and I put pots there, and so now I can grow things in there. So that's another benefit. Okay, and then of course there's the benefit of also being able to add color that complements your landscape or your plants that you're growing in it. I'm going to show you I'm going to show you one. It doesn't look very good right now because it's been a crappy spring, and so my bush is not looking very good. My bush. I need to trim my bush. But the pot is actually really good for showing off the color of the leaves when they're actually looking good. So I'm going to turn the camera around and show you what I mean. So there's my yellow pot. And there's the bush, which when it's looking better, it has, you know, sort of creamy, variegated, yellowish leaf margins. So that pot really complements the bush. Another benefit, you can contain nasty, slutty, rampant spreading plants and still keep them in your garden if they spread by runners, that is. Not so much if they spread by seed, but if you want to keep something that just like sends out a whole bunch of rhizomes underground and you really like it, but you can't risk putting it in the ground, you can put it in a pot. And then you can keep it, and you can keep it under control, and it's behaved. You know, it might try to misbehave, but there's a trick I can tell you about that too. So that's another benefit of having containers. I wanted to bring you to show you this one because another benefit of them is that they can add architectural interest. In this case, this is quite a tall pot, probably 24 inches, maybe 30 inches tall, I guess. And if it were placed somewhere in amongst lower growing things, it would allow me to put something up here that could maybe cascade or hang over, or at a height that it wouldn't be able to necessarily achieve without a pot, and also in a very interesting way. So, right, another benefit is, shit, hang on. Okay, well, that thought, whatever it was, is gone into the ether. I have no idea what the fuck I was gonna say. Anyway, I'll try and remember it for later. I'm sure once I'm walking around in the garden I'll figure it out. But on to the disadvantages of pots. There's a couple of them, not that many. One, they will degrade over time. Different pots have different advantages, and I'll go over that later. Two, drainage can be a problem. A lot of the times the drainage holes that the pots are given when they're manufactured are not sufficient, or if you put them on top of like a clay or a heavy soil, then their drainage is limited because the bottom of the pot is too compressed into the soil. They can also dry out very quickly because they are a freestanding structure, and they can retain heat a little bit more. That can also be a benefit, though, depending on what you're growing in it. And another one is, if I guess for the ceramic pots, again, this goes back to the sort of the degrading thing, but they can crack over winter time. So I will tell you about that later as well. Now I'm going to go into the specific types of planters, pots that I grow with, and the benefits and disadvantages of each of those. So hang on a sec. Okay, here's the first kind of pot I'm going to mention. This is a fiberglass one. Very, very sturdy. Definitely worthwhile if you can't afford the larger sized pots like me so much. These ones give you an affordable alternative. I wish that guy would shut the hell up with his car. Anyway. So you can get bigger pots for a decent amount of money. I think these were like 25 bucks at Home Depot, and this is a pretty good size. So they're also really, really durable, and they retain their color quite nicely. So highly recommend them. I don't think that there are any disadvantages that I can think of. Yeah, I would highly, highly recommend these if you can't afford the expensiver ones. Great, plastic pots. Now, my opinion on plastic pots is that they look kind of cheap. They always look cheap to me. However, I also am not the kind of person that is able to afford to buy the expensive pots all the time. So in that regard, they are an excellent way to do container gardening if you can't afford the ceramic kinds. There are things you can do to soup them up a little bit. Pinterest is a good place to start. Spray painting them, you name it. Some of them are better quality than others. These two here are pretty decent. Like they're quite sturdy. The cheaper ones will often crack after a year or two. And so if you are going to buy plastic pots, look for the ones that are a little bit heavier and not too rigid. Like, you want them to have a little bit of a give to them. They are really good for all seasons, but the thinner ones can get damaged by heating and cooling a lot of times, then they become really brittle. So they're kind of like the bottom of the line, right? But I mean, not everybody can garden with stuff from Chintz & Company or whatever. Yeah, so they definitely have their place, and I will not knock them. Right, so then we have the ceramic pots, like the one I showed you earlier, the blue ones, some of my favorites. These guys have a lot of benefits to them. The key thing that I've found with these guys is they often don't have proper drainage holes in the bottom, and I'm not exactly sure why they make the drainage holes so small, but I am a very blunt person by nature, and so what I do is I flip them over and I use the fork end of a hammer and I actually hammer the hole larger. I have wrecked pots this way, so if it's an expensive pot, don't fucking do that. The better way to do it is to make sure that you're putting well-drained soil in there and maybe like lifting the pot up off the ground. You can get those rollers, you know, that work really well for on decks or on concrete or smooth surfaces. Or if you don't have that, just put them on top of some rocks or a couple pieces of like 2x4 or something like that so that the hole isn't obstructed. And plant things in there that aren't going to freak out if they get a little bit more water than they should. Now, ceramic pots often are not glazed on the inside because they can't when they're firing them. And what that means is that they are susceptible to seasonal damage if you don't protect them properly. So what I would recommend is if you get them and they're not glazed properly on the inside, if they're not treated, get some, what is that stuff called? Varathane? Or like just any outdoor sealant, clear, and coat the inside of it with that and let it dry before you put anything in there. And what that does is that since it's a porous material, you're basically preventing the water from getting in there in the winter or whenever, and then freezing and expanding and then contracting again. And that's what causes them to crack. So if you seal the inside before you plant anything, you're going to like make your planter last a lot longer. I've got some over here that are actually supposed to be for indoors, and I brought them outdoors and I didn't treat them and they look like crap, and I'll show you exactly what they look like. It's an indoor ceramic pot that I did not treat, and the glaze is just flaking right off because it's been out in the weather and it's contracting and expanding, and yeah, it's it's not tolerating the weather very well. So if I were to have treated it before bringing it out, it may have had a much better chance, but I'm lazy a lot of the time and I just want a pot. So there it is. Pot of pots. Same kind of thing as with the ceramic. I mean, it is a ceramic, right? But it's just a different specific clay that they use, the orange clay. And I did not treat any of these, so as the season goes on, they are degrading. That can look kind of nice and add to the charm if you like that kind of falling apart type look, which is kind of pretty in the garden. But then you're also losing the life of your pot, the length of time. So what you can do is, again, just seal the inside and the out with a glaze, like a Varathane or something, an outdoor one, not an indoor one. And just, I add 2 coats, but you can just, you know, do whatever you feel is best. Right, so there I've got a concrete pot, and it is heavy as fuck. So, they can be very elegant, like this one is quite elegant. They also can take on that really pretty mossy appearance that's really nice. They do degrade, they get brittle and they chip like ceramics, so that is one disadvantage. I probably wouldn't use one for growing food. Or if I was going to grow food, then I would probably line it with a thick landscape plastic or something like that, just in case there's any chemicals in the cement that might leach into the food. They also tend to wick moisture, I've found, because they're very porous, and so they dry out really fast. So put things in there that can tolerate it, like that's an Artemisia, which loves that kind of deserty type conditions. Or make sure that you're putting in a growing medium that retains a lot of moisture if you're growing something in there that's needing more moisture. So, so yeah, there's a lot of benefits. They have sort of a more classical appearance a lot of the times, the cement ones, unless they're the aggregate and then they look like shit. They look like the commercial ones that grow, or that they grow stuff around, you know, malls and stuff like that. But the cement ones like this are quite classic looking. I've got a couple more out in the front I can show you too. Hang on. So I've got these 2 out here in the front. They were actually given to me. And they probably weigh about 100 pounds each, like at minimum. So, you know, if you're looking for something like classic looking, obviously you can see here it grows moss on it, which greens up in the wintertime, which is quite pretty. Something kind of old world and too fucking heavy for anyone to steal. They are brilliant for that. However, I would also recommend putting your plant, whatever you're going to plant into it, in a liner before you plant it into the pot. And this is a trick for another thing too, which I will tell you about later. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here. Just thought of another benefit of pots. So many benefits of growing in pots. So when I say container gardening, I don't necessarily mean like all of your plants in containers. As you can see, I grow with containers in and about all of my landscape. But another benefit I just thought of is that it can showcase certain plants that might get kind of lost amongst other things. So it's kind of like adding a frame to a picture. So here I've just got this little tree, which in itself is quite nice, and it would still be nice in the landscape, but this sort of makes it just a little bit more of an eye-catching thing. And this tree is not necessarily the most perfect example, but it's a way to make like a specimen plant stand out even more. If you have a beautiful specimen plant that you want to draw attention to, then a planter pot is a really good way to do that. I remembered what it was that I was going to tell you guys earlier, and it was, oh yes, I forgot again. Anything hardscaped in your landscape. So hardscaping is anything that's not organic. So statues, stones, pots, bricks, furniture, anything like that you're putting in your garden is a really, really nice sort of way to balance and ground a garden space. And so that's another benefit of having pots in the garden, is that they can kind of balance out all of this soft greenery. They add a pop of color, they ground the space, they add a bit of like hardness to the space as well. So that is another really wonderful benefit about using pots in your garden, or gardening with them at all. Like, you can put them anywhere, but that hardscaping element is really, really a wonderful thing. If you've got a ton of like blousy, flowy green stuff, just sort of grounds it all. So that's a really good thing too. Okay, now a few tricks for pots if you're going to be growing in pots. Especially if you've got the belly pots, the rounded ones. If you don't know what that is, I will show you just a sec. Right, so these blue pots here are belly pots, which means that the opening, oh, this one's cracking. Well, anyway, the opening is narrower than the body of the pot. And these can be a real pain in the ass if you need to divide something or take something out of them. So what I recommend is find a pot that fits perfectly into the diameter of the opening, and set that inside, and then plant your pot in that, so that you can just pull out or tip out the plastic pot that's inside. This one's obviously way too small. I just plunked it in here because that's what I want. This is where I want the hellebore to go, but I'm not ready yet to blend it. So yeah, line your belly pots with a plastic pot before you plant anything in them, just to save yourself a lot of hassle for later on. Another tip, if you have a plant that's aggressive, slutty, spready, or otherwise tenacious, thuggy, nasty, beastie, put mosquito lining in your pot before you plant, so that it covers the openings down below there, you can see there. Otherwise, you will find that you can plant your invasive thing in there and the roots will still come out the bottom. So this is a way to contain your nasty stuff while still keeping it in the garden. So you can place these pots in the ground or on top of the ground if you wish. Just dig a hole that's big enough for your pot and put them in the ground, just as long as you have this. And keep the top of it a little bit above there so that it doesn't start to come over there, and just keep an eye on it. All these little maple seedlings. So annoying. This is bear's breeches, which I know can be pretty tenacious, so that's why I've got it in the pot, and that's why I've got it lined here. I also do it for bamboo, alstroemeria, and a couple of other things that are really, really ridiculously slutty. So that's what I've learned helps to contain them and allows me to keep the pot still, or the plant still. One last tip: if you have a tall planter like this, and you don't intend to put necessarily a very large deep-rooted plant in there, you can put junk in the bottom and then put your planter on top of that to elevate the planter, so you don't have to fill the whole thing with soil. I put chunks of plastic down. I've got just like these, oh, that's not focusing. These plastic bricks. I don't even know where I got them from or whatever, but they're meant to be outside, so they're really sturdy, but they're lightweight. And that way, if I need to move the pot for any reason, then they're not going to be adding a ton of weight and a ton of extra lifting and a ton of extra like digging around and stuff like that. Try to avoid things that are really heavy. Try to avoid things that will degrade over time. The other thing that I will do is I will take a heavy-duty plastic pot and I'll just turn it upside down. As long as it can withstand the weight of whatever is on top of it, then it should be fine, just to support the top pot. And then this, I mean, it doesn't look very good right now, but once this fills out, it just cascades over the side, and you don't even really see these gaps. But if you want to, you can always fill this with like decorative moss or, you know, something that's pretty and lightweight. I do not recommend putting stones, like little stones. And the reason for that is if this moves around or you need to pull it out, all those stones are going to fall down into the middle, and that's a real pain in the ass. Also, it adds heat to the pot, which I discovered out in the front. I added stones all around the planter in the gaps, and that added so much heat that it actually started to kill off the plant that was in the pot. So yeah, just use something that's plastic, lightweight, preferably non-biodegradable, and then you don't need to use nearly as much soil. Obviously, that doesn't count if you're planting something like a tree or something like that that's going to need all of the depth. But for things that are smaller and you just want the height of the planter, that's one way to do it. So, okay, so that's my video about all different kinds of planters, all different ways that they can be of benefit in your landscape, tips for making them a little bit easier to handle, some of the disadvantages and specific features of different types of pots. I hope that was helpful. Go and plant something in a pot. Peace out, bitches.